You're watching F1 2023 Technical Analysis, brought to you by Aramco. The battle between the ingenuity of teams and Formula One's rulemakers is never-ending, particularly when it comes to one very significant aspect of car design. It's an area where the combination of the potentially significant performance benefits and the difficulty of policing collide to create enormous opportunity for teams. You can thank the laws of physics for that, because they make keeping this under control a complicated task. The latest flashpoint in a never-ending war of push and pull between the FIA and the teams is a technical directive that kicks in at the start of the Singapore Grand Prix weekend, and it could have a noticeable effect on how the second half of the season plays out. That's because it's all about flexible bodywork. And if you followed Formula One for a while, you'll be very familiar with the controversies that regularly flare up around flexi-wings. But if you're someone who is thinking, just have a black and white rule with zero tolerance policing, there are reasons why that cannot work. That's why this question is one of the most vexing, or perhaps we should say flexing, of all those facing F1's regulators. Flexible bodywork has long been banned in Formula One. This is enshrined in Article 3.2.2 of F1's technical regulations. This states that all aerodynamic components or bodywork influencing the car's aerodynamic performance must be rigidly secured and immobile with respect to their frame of reference, defined in Article 3.3. If you're wondering what Article 3.3 is about, it's simply defining bodywork that is part of the sprung mass of the car. Article 3.2.2 continues to say that, furthermore, these components must produce a uniform, solid, hard, continuous, impervious surface under all circumstances. The FIA has created a series of load deflection tests using bespoke equipment that can be carried out during F1 weekends. These apply a specific and considerable force in a specified place and evaluate the level of deflection. However, it is possible to pass these while not being compliant with the wider rules on bodywork flexibility laid out in the technical regulations. That's because it's impossible to test for every possible load on every part of the car. The load deflection tests are a very useful weapon in enforcing the regulations, but it's the catch-all rule about rigidity that matters. Passing the tests alone isn't enough to prove the car is legal. However, the FIA recognises that some flexing under load is unavoidable. Nothing can be infinitely rigid, and producing wings and floors that complied with the letter of the law would be impossible. Remember, downforce increases at the square of the speed, so the load the bodywork is exposed to is enormous. If parts didn't deflect at least slightly, they would either be prone to breaking or far too heavy. This necessary degree of freedom is an unavoidable grey area. The FIA must have some tolerance, but this can't be explicitly stated or measured. Therefore, it's about allowing a little leeway while preventing teams taking liberties with their designs. And if you don't like the sound of that, you'll have to take that up with the laws of physics. This is why there have been periodic controversies over flexible bodywork. The FIA has gradually evolved its methods for legality checking over the years, which now includes using video evidence helped by the dots that appeared on rear wings during 2021. It also conducts physical inspections and can check the design schematics for all parts. But the teams have become more clever too. Any small degree of freedom is pushed to the extreme, with new technologies and ever more ingenious designs making it possible to create wings and floor edges that comply with whatever the latest guidelines are, but are outside of what the FIA wants to see. Ideally, teams want wings that retain their design shape when cornering for maximum downforce, but rotate or flex, back off as it's known, on the straights at high speed to reduce drag. It's even possible to control that flex to manipulate the all-important aerodynamic centre of pressure, potentially keeping it further rearward for stability in high-speed corners, but further forward in slower turns to aid rotation. Front wing flexibility is usually all about achieving such balance change. There have even been suggestions teams are using flexibility to let the front wing end plates flex in a way that encourages drag-reducing outwash. However, this is not easy. The regulations prevent mechanical mechanisms being used, which means the key battleground is the structure of the wings and the carbon fibre layup. Remember the famous flapping Ferrari front wings of 2011 as it tried to catch up with Red Bull's remarkably effective designs. You might also remember Red Bull being excluded from qualifying in Abu Dhabi 2014 because it had front wing flaps designed to deflect under load. Exploiting flexible bodywork is all part of the game and likely always will be, but the key challenge is to contain its proliferation, as well as ensure everyone shares the same understanding of what is legal and what is illegal. So why this latest technical directive? Well, firstly, it's important to note that it's not an entirely new one. TD18 was first introduced in 2021 amid controversy about the flexibility of the Red Bull rear wing. It came into effect in mid-June and focused on rear wing flexibility. The TD was reissued multiple times over the next year or so, but it was withdrawn for 2023 because the measures it contained were incorporated into the technical regulations. However, the FIA felt it needed to reissue this TD in dramatically modified form because of what FIA single-seater technical director Tim Goss, yes, that's the same Tim Goss who was a key player at McLaren from 1990 to 2018, described as a little bit too much creep in design details of aerodynamic components. This led to TD18 being reissued in draft form on August the 22nd, with wording designed to counteract the design creep. Drafts are circulated to the teams for feedback that is then used to tweak the wording to ensure the final version is as comprehensive as possible. The definitive version was issued on September the 4th. The technical directive highlights the fact the FIA is aware of bodywork designs that comply with the load test in the regulations, but that exploit localised compliance or relative motion. So that basically means variability in the characteristics of the way it bends under load across a component, say a front wing element, or decoupled parts that allow freedom to move. So, for example, a front wing flap might move downwards relative to the end plate it is meant to be attached to. When it comes to front wings, this is particularly targeting areas of flexibility where the front wing planes meet either the end plates or the front wing support pillars. While the FIA accepts there will be a certain amount of back-off, what it is keen to see is that this is indeed uniform. Effectively, it means any bending or rotation must be of a broadly uniform distribution. The TD specifically lists 4 designs it says are not permitted. The first 2 are wing elements that move vertically, longitudinally, or laterally relative to whatever bodywork they are attached to, and wing elements that rotate relative to the bodywork they are fixed to. The next is designs using elastometric fillets, i.e. that distort under load, then return to their original shape once unloaded, in compliant sections of wing profile, or thin, flexible laminate at junctions that can deflect to aero advantage. Also not permitted are designs using soft trailing edges to prevent cracking as a result of the deflection. The TD also mentions cases that are permitted that relate to details of the floor, plank, slot gaps and pin-jointed structures, i.e. those permitting relative rotation on one axis. A quick interruption to tell you about a new podcast we've been running as part of our F1 Tech Show feed. Aramco F1 Focus takes a look at F1 in a unique way to get you thinking about Grand Prix racing just a little bit differently. Host of the show, Tim Sylvie, is here to tell you more.
Thanks, Ed. Nicely teed up. The show, as you rightly say, aims to get the audience thinking about F1 slightly differently. We hit topics with fresh perspectives, performance insights, and statistical surprises.
And you're not alone behind the mic, so tell us about the experts that sit alongside you.
So the show's broken down into 3 focus areas. Performance, where racer and broadcaster Alex Brundle provides the perspective from behind the wheel. Then we have a stat focus with the stat man to the stars, Sean Kelly. And for the final piece, we bring in big and interesting names from F1 to get proper nerdy with the likes of F1 engineer Pat Simmons.
Yeah, it really is fascinating to hear a driver's and statistician's view. And with Sean's ridiculous brain, which appears to be made up of every F1 stat and piece of data in history, you'd be amazed how the guys can make an entire segment on winning from low grid slots not only fun to listen to, but downright insightful and educational. You might just learn a thing or two.
Kind words, Ed, kind words. So if you haven't tuned in yet, please do come and have a listen. And if you want to join the conversation and get a shout out on the show, tweet us at Aramco F1 Focus.
So the big question is whether the technical directive will have an impact on what happens on track in the final 8 races of 2023. Well, Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff joked that maybe it means Red Bull will suddenly be half a second slower. In case you're wondering, that was not in any way a serious suggestion. But Wolff did say quite rightly that it depends on who is exploiting the potential of flexi-wings the most. He did name-check Aston Martin and its step backwards earlier in the season, something that has widely been attributed to the FIA tightening its scrutiny of flexible bodywork even before the technical directive. Aston Martin has consistently failed to comment about whether it has had to make changes this season, simply stressing the car has always been legal. There's every chance all the teams will have to change at least something. Few give details, although Williams head of vehicle performance Dave Robson confirmed his team will have to make some minor tweaks to its floors. Red Bull team principal Christian Horner has said it doesn't affect his team, but did point to what he called a few rubbery nose boxes elsewhere in the pit lane. That will be in reference to teams designing the front wing assembly in a way that deflects. The intersection of the front wing and the support pillars and the pillars and the nose will certainly be under scrutiny. McLaren team principal Andrea Stella says he is not very concerned about the changes, while Ferrari's Fred Vasseur downplayed it simply as a clarification of the existing regulation. As for Aston Martin's Mike Crack, he said, "For us, it will not be a concern." But of course, they would all say that. Every single team will exploit flexible bodywork as far as they are permitted to, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the FIA's job is to ensure things don't get out of control. And that doesn't just mean now, but also in the future. The FIA's technical directive is unlikely to have any substantive impact on the relative pace of the cars now, albeit with a caveat that a tightly congested field in terms of performance means small swings matter, but it will prevent things going too far in the future. That's the challenge for the FIA technical department. And that's because flexible bodywork always has been, and likely always will be, a topic that requires constant interventions. Thanks for watching F1 2023 Technical Analysis, brought to you by Aramco.